So a while back, I cut the Sydney Sparkler design in cubic zirconia, and the finished gemstone definitely sparkled. That was one beautiful gemstone. However, I'm not a big fan of CZ. It ranks in the top 10 of my no thank you gems that I want to cut. Just a step below the stones I really don't like, which include kunzite, fluorite, and apatite. So I'm going to cut this design again in a different gem material. But if not CZ, then what gemstone would look good in the Sydney Sparkler design? It was designed for gems with a very high refractive index, like CZ, so I was thinking, what about zircon? Unlike CZ, cubic zirconium, which is a lab-created material, zircon is a natural gemstone, not lab-created. And zircon has one of the highest refractive indexes of all naturally occurring gemstones, other than diamonds, which has the highest refractive index of natural gemstones. Here is the link to the video I made on the Sydney Sparkler design when I used this design to cut a piece of CZ. You can refer to that video for more information on the Sydney Sparkler design itself. Here is what the Sydney Sparkler design looks like from the top, side, and bottom. If I cut the zircon correctly, it should look like this. Okay, I was looking through my zircon inventory for some zircon to cut, and I found these two pieces that BOPIE had bought for me at the Tucson show of way back in 2007 from Thomas S. out of San Diego, very reputable gem dealer. So this is red zircon. It appears dark. I'm going to cut one of these, and since the design I want to use is kind of a round, I think I'll cut this one. We'll see how the design turns out, whether the stone ends up too dark or not. Let's see how much this stone weighs. Okay, the stone weighs in at let's call it 36.75. 36.75 carats. And again, Tucson show 2007, and from then to today, the prices of red zircon looks like they've about doubled. And it also shows you how far behind I am on cutting my stones. I gotta cut more than I collect. Okay, when I mount a gemstone onto a dop, the first thing I need to do is make a flat spot on the gemstone that the dop can adhere to. So I use generally a pretty rough diamond lap to do to make a flat spot. In this case, it's a 320 grit diamond topper I'm using, and I just grind a bit to get a flat spot. Okay, so that's what I'll use to adhere my dop to, either with two-part epoxy or super glue. And generally for me, when it's a bigger stone, I use two-part epoxy. If it's a really small stone, I use super glue. So I'll use two-part epoxy for this stone. And I use the rough lap because that will make pretty big scratches, which helps the adhesive stick to the stone. Okay, we're going to immerse our red zircon in Refractol and see if that helps us at all see the interior of the stone. Refractol has the same refractive index as quartz, not the same refractive index as zircon, but it may help. Let's see. Oh yeah. So it does help us a little bit examine the interior of the stone. There are some fractures in the stone. And there, let's see. Right along there. But I don't see a lot of inclusions. Pretty clean, other than a couple of fractures. So, Refractol, not perfect for Zircon, but better than nothing. So overall it's an okay stone. We'll see if we have any problems with these fractures as we cut it. Okay, so the next step for putting the stone on the dop is we select the dop. So want a dop that's bigger or as big as the stone, like this one is, and that'll help us. We won't glue this dop to the stone, but it'll help us kind of get the center point of the stone. And then once we get it set in our transfer fixture using this oversized dop, we will switch to the smaller dop that I'm going to use, about 8mm dop, and it'll already be lined up so it'll fit. Just slide down the transfer fixture onto the stone. On the bottom side of the stone, the top side's flat, and that's going to help us glue to the dop. The bottom side's not flat. So for the bottom side, what I do is I get a piece of modeling clay. You know, you can buy a whole big package for $1 or something. And I get a piece of the modeling clay and I put it in on the dop, and that'll help us put the bottom part of the stone. It'll kind of, press into that modeling clay and help us line up the top part to make sure it's flat. So let me go ahead and put it in the transfer fixture. Okay, so now that we've got the bottom dop with the modeling clay and the oversized top dop that we're temporarily using to line up and center our stone, we can kind of move the stone around and get it centered, and then push down on that top dop, get it in there nice and flat, and again make sure it's centered kind of where we want it. It looks like it's about pretty good centered. And then push it down, push the top dop into the stone, kind of put some pressure on there. And while you're holding it, what I do is kind of mess with the modeling clay a little bit. That helps it, fit itself to the bottom part of the stone. Then we just switch out the dops, and with the smaller dop, which should already be centered. So when we switch out dops with the smaller dop, when we push that onto the stone, it's now centered, which would be pretty difficult to do with just this stone. That's why we use that oversized dop first. So now we'll mix up the two-part epoxy and put that on the stone. So I use the Zircon two-part epoxy, which is a hardener and a resin. And I also used to use the JB Weld. No complaints with JB Weld, it worked great. But I'm currently testing out the Zircon, and it's also working great. So what I do is I use a business card. Some people use, Post-it notes, in anything, a lid, whatever. And you mix in 2 puddles of your epoxy. As long as they're not mixed together, it's okay. Once you start mixing them together is when they start the process to hardening up. So making 2 little puddles, just with your eyes. You don't have to be perfect. You want a 50-50 mix, but again, it does not have to be perfect. So just kind of eyeball it and get close to a 50-50 mix. That looks to me pretty close to a mix. So then I simply mix the 2 together, and once you start mixing them, you'll have a couple of minutes to get the epoxy onto the stone. Give it a good mix. Don't worry about bubbles or anything else. There's absolutely no issues. Okay, so once you get your epoxy mixed up, you put it on the dop, and I put it a little ways up the dop so I get epoxy on the dop as well as on the stone. You just don't want it running down the dop into your transfer fixture, and you don't want it running down the side of the stone. Then you just gently push the stone the dop onto the stone, tighten the transfer fixture down, turn it over, and let gravity do what gravity does. And as the epoxy is setting up, it'll run down a little bit, and that's fine. You just watch it, don't let it run down too far. And after it starts running down, just turn it over and let it run onto the stone. And just don't let it run too far. And you keep turning the transfer fixture over and over until your two-part epoxy starts setting up, which should only take a couple of minutes. And then you let it set overnight, and you're ready to cut your stone. Or if you're in a hurry, as I've seen and demonstrated, you can take your stone and put it into the oven, turn the oven on to 200 degrees. When it hits 200 degrees, turn the oven off, let it cool back down by itself without opening the oven. And then after about an hour in the oven, when everything's back to the normal temperature, you take it out, and the epoxy is hard, and you're ready to fast it at that time. So if you're in a hurry, you don't even have to wait. But generally, I'm working on more than one stone at a time, so I can work on a stone while the next one that I put in the dop is setting up.
안녕하세요. Please let me introduce myself. My name is BOPIE. Today, I would like to give you an update on a stone in an earlier video that was cut by my husband, Michael. A while ago, I was approached by a customer to create a unique ring for herself. Happened to be with the amethyst. In order for us to create the ring, we needed Michael's help. The ring was hand sketched, and I used my Matrix program to process the design. The design included an emerald cut, AAA quality, which means the top of the line, amethyst. The final measurements of the stone is 18 by 13 and weighed approximately 12 karat. That's huge. I thought stone may be a little bit too big, but it was the size that she wanted it, and it looked great. I obviously needed to enhance the color of the amethyst, so I added a little sparkle called diamonds. And to give the ring some personality and uniqueness, I included my customer's initials and my BOPIE'S logo. After we waited for a long time for the ring to be complete, we were thrilled how it turned out. The ring was absolutely gorgeous. Working with the customer, I was able to design exactly what she had it in her mind. Be sure to share your thoughts in the comment sections below, and thank you for watching BOPIE'S. Now, back to Mike's latest cutting adventure.
All right, I'm ready to start cutting on our red zircon with our Sydney sparkler design. So I've got a 320 topper that I'll start with, and the first set of instructions cuts all the way around, kind of round the stone out and make a temporary center point. So I'll may get all the way to a temporary center point, or I just may get close to it. And then the second set of instruction follows the same teeth, index teeth, around the stone to cut the girdle. So we'll see how it looks after that. Okay, we've got the red zircon preformed with our 320. Now I'll work through the 600 grit topper and then the 12M, and we should be looking pretty good. I think we've got all the issues out of this stone. Okay, I've started going over the pavilion of the red zircon with the 3K diamond on a bat lap, and when I first started cutting this stone, I was thinking it looked maybe a little bit dark. I was a little worried about it, but the more I cut it, the more I'm starting to pre-polish it and polish it, the more lively it's becoming. It can't wait to get the other half, get this side polished and get the other side polished, see what it looks like. It definitely is not going to be a dark stone. Okay, our zircon, I polished it up with aluminum oxide on a tin lap, and so now I'll transfer the stone so I can start to work on the upper half of the stone. As I showed you when I previously cut this design in CZ, to align the top of the stone after the transfer, you can only use specific girdle facets. I've used my Sharpie here to mark what I will use as the 2 94 teeth of my index. I would refer you to the link to the previous video where I cut the CZ if you want to see more on how to align this stone after transferring to the crown. Okay, so sometimes you get a setback. It's 2 steps forward and 1 step backwards sometimes. And with our Zircon, there's a fracture internal crack right there. So it was much bigger. I mean, I've worked through it now, and you can't, that part's going to go away when I cut the crown. But I could have left the inclusion in there, in which case the stone wouldn't be as pretty as I wanted it. I could have changed the angles of the crown and cut much more shallow of an angle, but that would have really changed the design. I didn't want to do that either. So the third option, of course, is to cut the girdle in and then cut down the crown until I could work through the fracture, which is what I did. The problem is now I'm going to have to go back and recut the bottom half, or the pavilion of the stone. So I haven't ever done that before. I haven't had that big of a problem where I had to redo the pavilion, but in this case, that's what I'm going to have to do to get this fracture out of there. And I did make the stone smaller than I would have liked, but I want a beautiful stone, so I had to sacrifice some carat weight to get the, hopefully get a beautiful stone out of this. We'll see how it turns out. All right, I finished polishing the upper half of our red Zircon. There's the inclusion, and so when I brought in the girdle, made the stone a little smaller. I'll cut the crown right above where this point of these 2 facets right here, so it'll cut out that inclusion. So I did sacrifice size and carat weight to have a more internally flawless stone. Okay, this is the same inclusion right here under 10 power magnification, and you can see it would have been right on the table if I left it. So all of that's going to chip out, so we'll cut the table from the top of this point here to here, so just enough to get rid of that inclusion, and that'll be the table. Then I'm going to have to go back and recut the bottom half, or the pavilion of the stone, because I moved that girdle in and it changed those facets around. Okay, I had trouble on the polishing the table of this Zircon, and I read some sites where people have had trouble before with 1 facet or more with the Zircon. Nothing wanted to polish it. I tried pretty much everything, and it was leaving fine scratches. So what I did is I took my 60,000 grit diamond on a bat lap, and then after I put it on the lap, I just took a paper towel and pretty much wiped it down, taking off almost all of everything, the grit that I just put on there in the oil. And then I turned the lap off and just put the stone on it, touched it to the lap, and just swept the stone back and forth, and then with my finger I moved the lap. So that polished it up finally, got rid of all the scratches. So that was something I'd read about from the U.S. Fasteners Guild in one of the forums and in some other articles. So I guess once in a while Zircon can give you a problem, but that's how I dealt with that facet. So now, because I had to bring the girdle in to get rid of that inclusion, I'm going to transfer the stone and redo the pavilion, or the bottom half of the stone, and repolish that, and then we'll be done. Okay, I've finished polishing the pavilion of our red zircon for the second time, and I think I've got it now. So we'll soak it in acetone and take a look at our Sydney sparkler in a zircon. I cut this red zircon using the Sydney sparkler design. I had some unique problems with this gemstone. First off, the rough had fractures and was definitely not internally flawless. Worse luck, there ended up with a fracture that would have been right in the very worst place on the table. So to deal with that fracture, I had to recut the girdle, unfortunately making the stone smaller to get that fracture out of the top of the stone. But by recutting the girdle, I then had to do something I haven't had to do before, and that's to go back and recut and repolish the pavilion, or lower half of the stone. I don't mind putting in the extra time needed to get a stone just right, but I do hate losing carat weight, and I lost some on this stone. The lesson you can learn from my mistake is carefully examine your rough before you buy. I also had a problem that other fasteners have reported sometimes with zircon, and that being that the crown, sometimes just doesn't want to take a polish. I tried my Greenway lap with aluminum oxide and it left fine scratches. I tried the 14,000 grit and 50,000 grit lightning laps and they left fine scratches. I tried aluminum oxide on my tin lap and it left fine scratches. I tried the 60,000 diamond on a bat lap and initially it got fine scratches. I even tried to polish it with 14,000 grit diamond on a bat lap and call it good enough, but that too left fine scratches. What finally worked was to set up my 60,000 grit diamond on a bat lap as normal, and then take a dry piece of paper towel and with the lap running, wipe off almost all of the 60,000 diamond paste and the snake oil that I just put on the lap, leaving the lap almost dry, almost. Then I turned the lap off and swept the table of the stone over a stationary lap, and I moved the lap around a little bit with my finger, but it was mostly stationary, and that did the trick. I hope I don't have to use this trick again. Finally, I was worried that this zircon would be too dark to cut, but the finished stone in this design is not too dark. It looks great. The design, Sydney Sparkler, is not a complicated design, but you do have to pay attention when you align the gemstone after transferring dots, as you have to use the correct girdle facets to align to your index after transfer. I would recommend you give this design a try. Regardless of your skill level as a fastener, you will enjoy cutting the Sydney Sparkler, and it does cut a beautiful gemstone in red zircon. If you can find any red zircon rough, that is. But I will say, in cubic zirconian CZ, which this design was created for, and it's the first gemstone I cut with this design, the Sydney Sparkler cuts an awesome CZ. If you do cut this design in any gem material, please let me know how it turns out. I'd love to see what other gems look like in this design. And as always, happy fastening, everyone.